Okay, well, Martin, thank you very much for inviting me to speak today. I'm just sorry that I can't be with you in Toronto. And so this is a first for me. I've had to come all the way upstairs to my home office to do this presentation. And I haven't done a presentation remotely like this before, so hopefully it will go well. So for 32 years, I think it is, I was head of pharmacy at Alder Hey Children's Hospital in Liverpool, and also worked with the UK Medicines for Children Research Network, also with the European Medicines Agency and with the World Health Organization. But I'm now retired from the National Health Service in the UK, but hold honorary research positions with two of Liverpool's universities. And I continue also to work with the European Medicines Agency and the World Health Organization. So I have no conflict of interest to declare, and I receive no benefit from either of the sponsors of the meeting. Alder Hey Children's National Health Service Foundation Trust, as it's called, is one of the largest health facilities for children in Europe. It was built as a workhouse at the beginning of the last century, but it's soon to open a futuristic new hospital in the park, which I show you here. And throughout my career in pediatrics, I've been motivated really by two quotations. The first is that by Harry Shirky, the American pediatrician who is also qualified as a pharmacist. And he described children as therapeutic or pharmaceutical orphans when he couldn't find authorized medicines in age-appropriate dosage forms to treat children. And the second is that by Everett Koop, a former Surgeon General in the United States who was also a pediatric surgeon, who reinforced the obvious that if patients don't take their drugs, then they won't work. So no matter how good the pharmacological and clinical development, the nature of the formulation is all important in ensuring that children adhere to their treatments. And over the last 100 years, the problem has been recognized, unfortunately, often through therapeutic misadventure. And it was in the mid to late 70s that the FDA in the United States took steps to begin correcting the problem. But in Europe, it was under a French presidency of the European Union back in 2000 that vital steps were taken to introduce a European pediatric regulation, as it's known. It came into force in 2007, and I'll say a little bit more about this later. But of course, as Carol has said, really, within this product and information vacuum, we were still able to treat children. So larger hospitals like mine produced their own formularies or dosage guides, which reflected local practice, but usually took into account the relevant scientific literature and brought some consistency and safety in prescribing. And of course, as we've heard, pharmacists make and made medicines for children, extemporaneously dispensing or compounding them from active drugs and excipients, or by starting from an authorized dosage form, such as tablets, and crushing them and producing an oral liquid. Back in 1994, pharmacists working in neonatology and pediatrics in the UK and Ireland formed an association which was soon joined by Norway and Sweden, the association known as the Neonatal and Pediatric Pharmacists Group. And the NPPG celebrates its coming of age this year and maintains strong links with the Royal College of Pediatrics and Child Health. And this is, I think, a uniquely strong link between the medical profession and the pharmacy profession. And the two groups formed a joint standing medicines committee, which persuaded most hospitals to give up their local formularies and produce a national publication called Medicines for Children. And in 2003, the British National Formulary was persuaded to use their extensive resources and take on regular publication of what became the British National Formulary for Children, the first edition appearing in 2005. And in the UK, the Department of Health has distributed the book free of charge to all prescribers and pharmacies in the UK. And it's used in many parts of the world, and as you'll hear later, it's influenced developments in New Zealand. And Medicines Committee has enjoyed many other successes, the most recent of which is the production of patient information on unlicensed and off-label medicines, which is freely available to carers and to professionals to download from the web. Now, the UK government fully supported the introduction of a Europe-wide paediatric regulation and contributed significantly to its development. But it was persuaded that there was a need for a research infrastructure to cope with an increased demand for paediatric research, and it funded a UK-wide Medicines for Children research network, in particular reaching out to accommodate the needs of the pharmaceutical industry. And this graph just shows the way in which the number of studies undertaken by the Medicines for Children research network increased after the introduction of the paediatric regulation. And the UK network has become something of a template for a number of other countries in Europe. So the European paediatric regulation is really similar to that in the United States, in that it requires and rewards the industry for studies undertaken in children. The difference is the very early stage in the drug development process at which the EMA requires a paediatric investigation plan to be submitted. This is at the end of phase 1 studies in adults, and it's designed really to encourage companies to have paediatric needs at the heart of their research program right from the start. And the regulation also requires submission of all the existing studies on drugs which are already authorized. Some of these will have been published, others will not. And this data is reviewed and a decision made on whether alterations to the pediatric section of the authorization are required. And importantly, the regulation also provided funding for older established medicines and offered reward for research which generally was leading to the marketing of a new age-appropriate formulation, the so-called PUMA, or the Pediatric Use Marketing Authorization. Well, we know that drug development is a slow process, so perhaps not surprisingly, in 2012, when this was reviewed, some 5 years after the introduction of the regulation, only a few drugs had made it through the whole process. And last year, 2014, you'll see that the number of applications for pediatric investigation plans remains very high, but there is still obviously a large number of drugs within the system from which children have yet to benefit. So let me now just focus on this all-important point of getting the right formulation which is appropriate to the age and ability of the child. We know that many medicines for children are still used off-label, and if you just look at this, these bar charts, you can see that about a third of medicines that are introduced in a particular year are likely to be approved for children in the lighter blue colour. The rest of them are not, yet about 40% of them are either already being used in children or have the potential to be used in children. So these drugs have been marketed for adults and are likely to have dosage forms that are only appropriate to adults. So a very important question then, when we're dealing with children and children's medicines, is at what age can children take tablets? And you'll have your own views and you might want to express them later. Of course, if you're a pharmacist, and I believe there's many in the audience, your answer to this question probably is, what do you mean by a tablet? And of course, the sizes of tablets and capsules differ considerably, as does their functional type. So varying from the orodispersible, which is a very different prospect in terms of administration, to those large monolithic tablets that are designed to be swallowed whole. But colleagues in Europe have been focusing their research on the design and the acceptability of so-called mini tablets, tablets that are less than 4 millimeters in diameter. And some recent publications are showing that orodispersible mini tablets are even acceptable to neonates. And of course, they have some advantages over liquids in that they're less likely to contain excipients of concern and are both cheaper to produce and more easily transportable than liquids. And that's a potential advantage, of course, for resource-poor countries. Now, as part of the European paediatric regulation, the paediatric committee that was set up to review paediatric investigation plans recognized that it would require specialist advice on formulation, so it established a formulation working group. And this group, at monthly intervals, reviews any paediatric investigation plan referred to it and advises if the proposed formulation is likely to be acceptable, whether acceptability will be tested as part of clinical studies, and I think very importantly, whether the manufacturer has an alternative administration strategy for those children who cannot manage the dosage form that they propose. And before the European regulation came into force, the European Medicines Agency produced a reflection paper which summarized the state of knowledge about pediatric formulations. And this has since advanced to publication of firm guidelines for the industry just last year. And this information can be found on the European Agency's website, best done with a Google search. The reflection paper attempted to indicate the acceptability of different formulations for different age groups. But we have to keep reminding people that this information was obtained from a small survey of middle-class German parents and may not be representative of all cultures. And there's clearly a need for further research on age-related acceptability of different formulations and also on methods of measuring acceptability. Now, the regulation I mentioned also required funding of research on older established medicines. And here I just list a number of the projects that were funded, and you can see that many of them have involved the development of an age-appropriate formulation, but as might be expected, also development of the neglected neonatal sector. The first medicine to gain a pediatric marketing authorization was buccal midazolam in 2011. And previously, there was widespread use of off-label midazolam injection by the buccal route in preference to the authorized rectal diazepam. We now have an appropriate buccal preparation. In 2007, the European Pediatric Formulations Initiative was established, designed to bring together industry, academics, practitioners, observed by regulators, with the aim of resolving the scientific, regulatory and technical issues that are associated with pediatric formulation development. And I list here just several active work streams that have published their findings in the International Journal of Pharmaceutics. And we also have a freely available database of information on excipients of concern, as well as annual conferences and a link to the equivalent organization in the United States. Now, in developing medicines for younger children, especially for neonates, came a recognition that excipient chemicals are handled just like medicines, and in the developmentally immature may cause adverse effects. So EU funding was made available for a study of excipients in neonates, the so-called ESNI study, part of which involved population PK and sparse sampling methods to examine the kinetics of parabens and ethanol. And with ethanol, we've been concerned not so much about the clearance of the parent compound by neonates, but the accumulation of the intermediate metabolite acetaldehyde, and that now requires further research work. Other European Union funding has allowed the establishment of a research network of excellence called GRIP, standing for Global Research in Pediatrics, involving primarily researchers in Europe, the USA, Canada, and Japan. And as well as developing a master's course in pediatric drug development, which includes a module on pediatric formulations, we've run a series of Meet the Expert webinars, which are all available on the GRIP website. And given, as we've heard, that many medicines for children are still prepared extemporaneously or compounded by the pharmacist, a European Union-funded formulary of such pediatric medicines is under preparation, and it will only include formulae which meet agreed clinical and quality standards. So this is another specialized aspect of formulary development. And alongside these European initiatives, locally in Liverpool, we've also developed a pediatric research agenda. So ADRIC was possibly the biggest study to date of adverse drug reactions in hospitalized children. Michael Reeder, who I'm pleased to see is in the audience, was one of our advisors. And we've developed pediatric-specific tools to evaluate both causality and avoidability of pediatric adverse drug reactions. But we've also looked at the evidence of quality, efficacy, and safety of manipulating so-called adult dosage forms to give smaller doses to children, and have published guidelines which are available on the Alder Hey Children's Hospital website. But I believe very importantly, we're also talking to carers about how they actually administer medicines to children. There may be little point in developing elegant dosage forms if they're crushed and added to food, and we know nothing of the effect of that interaction, or if bribery, punishment, or restraint are used frequently to produce adherence. And this will be the subject of the next GRIP webinar later this month. And finally, whilst innovation in administration devices and innovation in formulation development are important, in these days of austerity, then so is their cost. So one of the other things that we're looking at in Liverpool is the economics of innovative medicines and their unlicensed alternatives. So thank you for listening. I hope I've given you a flavour for some of the initiatives that we're undertaking in Europe aimed at providing better medicines for children, and with apologies for the gender stereotyping, but as you can see, I've got my grandchildren in training already to carry on this campaign. Thank you.